need to gavel in this, the beginning of our school board meeting tonight. There is a group of students from North Trail and Aiken Road that we're demonstrating tonight, so we may take a couple seconds to actually get settled in. We can proceed to the Pledge of Allegiance if we'd like. All right, so please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, well, thanks for joining us tonight. I guess, let's see. Can, I guess, proceed to the agenda. I'm just a little caught off guard because there's so much going on. It's awesome. It's good to have so much going on, but in any case, first item on our agenda, this is a work session. First item on our agenda is approval of the agenda. The agenda has been posted since last week, or since Wednesday. Wednesday of last week, right? And everyone's had a chance to take a look. Are there any comments on the agenda? If not, can I get a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Simmons, second by Doyle. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? None. We have an agenda. We have some administrative actions in the agenda. The first is a consent agenda. I'll have a quick statement to read. The consent agenda is made up of routine business items that can be acted upon with one motion. If any board member wishes to discuss an item, they may request it be pulled from the consent agenda and it will be acted upon separately. Does anyone have any items that they'd like to pull from the consent agenda? Seeing none, can I get a motion to pass the consent agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Doyle, second by Simmons. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
That consent agenda has passed. Our next item, we start going into work session topics. Our first item in that section of the agenda is Aiken Road and North Trail Elementary School Showcase, which is the good stuff that's going outside in the hallway here at City Hall. You guys can come join us at the table if you would prefer. Yeah, sorry. At the work sessions, we tend to do everything here at the table. And
This is friendlier.
during the business meetings, we've
Much
got the
friendlier.
Sure. All right, I'm Kelly Galarno. I'm the interim principal at North Trail Elementary. And for our showcase tonight, our tremendous third grade team presented, and our third grade students presented a project that they did on Native American research and history. Our third grade team wanted to incorporate a meaningful learning experience around the valuable resources provided by the American Indian Parent Advisory Council as they began planning literacy lessons for the month of November. So it's been a while since the kids did this project, but I think they did a really good job of remembering and presenting what they did. Their plan included a study of the Native American folktale, The Girl Who Loved Wild Horses by Paul Goebel, as well as a nonfiction text about 6 Native American tribes. They brainstormed ideas in collaboration with our teaching, learning, and equity teams and realized that a real-world experience for learners would be to present information as news reporters using their iPads and the green screen tools. So on their iPads, it was their little faces, but they were incorporated in all of these different places. North Trail would like to sincerely thank Maury Deer, Pete Fleener, Rick Yonker, and Maddie Sullivan for their assistance with the project. They came and collaborated with our teachers and with our students, and it was a really awesome learning experience for all. We're very proud of these learners and the hard work that they put into their projects, and like I said, they did a great job out there representing and explaining what they learned. So thank you for having them out here. I said this was a really cool experience for kids. I wish I had been able to do that when I was young, to show people this is what we do at school. So thank you for providing that opportunity.
All right, well, welcome. I am Trace Magnuson, principal at Aiken Road Elementary, and I have brought with me tonight Julie Heckman, who is our first grade teacher. Julie did a big community building piece in her classroom this year, which has, of course, spread tons of rumors around the building saying, what are you doing? What are you doing? I heard it's really cool. The kids tonight did a fabulous job explaining, even though it was a little hard to hear them. They did a really great job. They own it. It's a part of who they have become. And we are seeing so many positive outcomes to that we are looking forward to figuring out how we're going to expand that to the whole building, hopefully, and how it looks differently in each grade level. So we are excited about that. I'm going to let Julie explain a little bit more about what it actually was that she has done so incredibly well in her classroom.
I am so passionate that I had to write it down because I thought I'd be here an hour talking to you about it, but thank you. Thank you for letting us come out, and it was such a great experience for those kiddos out there. They were so nervous. They've been practicing, but, you know, they're little tiny voices, but they did amazing.
They didn't seem so nervous. They did a great job.
They did such a great job, yes. And I'm treating them to Subway tomorrow, so we're good. So creating an environment of mutual respect with strong relationships has always been number one in my teaching. I think students learn best when they have a relationship in the classroom with the teacher as well as the other students. It's been a top priority, but over the past few years, I have really noticed that more students are needing just that groundedness, that community support, that safety piece, and that respect. So I wanted to make sure that I was doing all that I can to make sure that was happening in my classroom. So this summer, I started really thinking about what those changes needed to be and what needed to happen. So I created a program that I call License to Learn, and it covers the Minnesota first grade standards and social studies as well as community building, and it combines with our Aiken Road Color House project that we do, which connects the students to the staff members, everybody at Aiken Road. We're all a part of this Color House project. So my students each created a house out of a rock. They painted it their Aiken Road house color. They receive a License to Learn sheet every Monday, and they are encouraged throughout the week to complete 6 wheels. And each wheel just stands for something good that they did that week. Whether it be helping another student, cleaning up the bathroom, taking care of their belongings, bringing in their homework, whatever it would be. Then to extend out, they each get a challenge each week of something they can do at home or in the community. So the whole point of the project is to connect school to home to the community. Along with that, I created a booklet, and we are learning about Farmington as a community, what it's like to be a part of a sports community, to be in Boy Scouts or Girl Scouts, so that they can see that there's communities all around them. They hold open doors, they help bake groceries, they help keep their neighborhood clean. Some of the students are even going to their neighbors and doing some shoveling. So the key is for them to continue to do good things. Every day we celebrate, we talk about it, and I spend a good 10 minutes every morning during our morning meeting talking about what did you do today. We clap for each other. What are our challenges for the next week? How can we do better? And we celebrate each other. On the back of the License to Learn, there are what I call speed bumps, because every one of us has speed bumps in our day and in our life. We don't always apply ourselves the best. We don't always have good days. So sometimes you just need that visual reminder that I'm not off to the greatest start, but I can turn it around. So the speed bumps are there for the kids visually to see how they're doing, but it's also a great communicator with the parents, because at the end of the week, they bring that sheet home, and on the one side, they see what their child did throughout the week to be kind to others and to bring community to the classroom. And on the flip side, they see how their student did in the classroom. Did they get speed bumps? Did they have tough days? They know right away this is what happened, and they can talk about it with their student and work through anything that they need to. So it's a great communicator week by week. The students earn their items. They get to choose. I'm always at the beginning of the month saying, okay, these are the new items. They get to choose what they want for their house. Some are driving cars. Some have people. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff to choose from. And what's cool about it is that every single student gets to be successful with that. Everybody's included, and everybody gets rewarded for doing good deeds. So at the end of the year, they will get to take these home as a reminder of their successes throughout the year. They'll bring their book home of all the changes in our community, pictures of where they started to where they're at. And I'm really hoping to build on it and continue it for the future.
We're excited.
Yeah, that's great. It is exciting.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I love that one of the things that we talk about in here as the, one of the things that makes Farmington really unique is about the flexibility and autonomy of our teachers to try new things, and that we're a yes community of try it and see how it goes. And I just love your example of how this is something that you thought about this summer and just brand new, and we're able to try it out, and now it's something that you want to scale up like through the school, and it's so cool.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So much. All right. Our next item is the 2023-24 budget alignment recommendations, and Jane Huska is here in Superintendent Berg's stead, but I think you would be here at the table anyway, so.
Thank you, Chair Christensen, board members, members of the community. Thanks for having us here tonight to continue our conversation for the 23-24 school budget. What we're going to be talking about tonight, most of it we've talked about before. It's either been approved by our parameters, which we discussed last time, or we've had further conversations. And as we know, the legislature isn't even close to being done with the omnibus bill for education. So as those items come forward, it could change a little bit, or it could change a lot. So we don't know. We're doing the best we can with the information that we have today. As you may recall, during the summer and early fall, we engaged with the company Teamworks to take a look at our demographics, our enrollment, and our housing developments that we're having here in Farmington to give us a picture of what is happening here in the district. And some key takeaways from that conversation and that process is that Farmington, when it comes to resident births, is really no different than anyone else in the state of Minnesota. Unfortunately, we are just seeing a decline in birth rates, and Farmington's sitting at approximately a 29% decline from having 608 births a year down to 434. So a decrease of roughly 174 births a year. Now, interestingly enough, our enrollment has increased over that same time span, but what's on the flip side of that coin is we're seeing that decline enter into our elementary schools. And if nothing else were to change, everything were to stay stagnant, we would see that decline in our high school as well. One thing that Farmington does have that a lot of other districts don't have is the potential for housing development. Now, if we look at the next 10 years, they are projecting that if 100% of the housing developments get put through, we could see a roughly additional 1,500 students in that enrollment. Now, will that come through or not? Who knows? But the good thing is that we have that potential where a lot of other districts don't. So that is a little light.
Is that housing developments currently planned, or?
Yes, currently planned. Yep, currently planned. With most of them coming in at the elementary level. And the other just interesting statistic for people that live in Farmington that might be helpful or beneficial is that in that same time span, your house value almost went up 30%. So average sale price went from $282,000 up to $366,000. So that's good for everybody as well. As we take a deeper dive into enrollment, a couple of things. When we're looking at this chart, it is based on ADMs, which is average daily membership. And so what that takes into consideration is all of the students that attend our school throughout the year, be it that they were here the full year, be it that they were here for a week, 2 months, 7 months, whatever it may be, it combines it all together. And looking at this, you can see the trends if we were to look at the elementary of what's that decline that we just spoke about. Aiken Road, for example, they had a high population in 14-15 of 703. And if you look at the end of 21-22, you can see they're down to 526. And when we look at Riverview, for example, they reached a high in 16-17 of 815. And during the 17-18 school year, that's when we introduced an AP into Riverview. And you can see since then, we have seen a decline in that school. And today, I'm going to give you a body count because I don't have ADMs, but currently the body count for Riverview is sitting at 625. So you can see that trend of decline. Meadowview is very similar. They're just kind of a year behind Riverview, right? You see their peak happening in 17-18, 18-19, we introduced a dean into Meadowview Elementary. And by 21-22, they're down to 637, 638. And as of today, they're sitting at 611. And if we happen to look at North Trail Elementary, you know, they had a high back in 14-15 of 640, and then they had 628, and then they kind of just have leveled off at that 600 mark. They fluctuate a little bit above, a little bit below. Today, they are sitting at 616, and they don't have any additional support there. So you can see we have roughly about 3 of our elementary buildings are sitting about at the same capacity. But this graph does show that our enrollment is declining. So we need to take that into consideration when we're building our budget for the next year. The next building block that we talked about when building our budget for the 23-24 school year happens to be the 3 different buckets for fund balances. The first bucket is our unassigned fund balance. And that is like your savings account, right? Everybody has a savings account that we have, and we have a board policy, 714, that our board policy is to have a fund balance between 8 and 12%. And we currently have, at the end of June 30th, 22, $7.9 million in that unassigned fund balance, which represents about 9% of our expenditures. And then to think about fiscally responsible, what are appropriate expenditures to take out of an assigned fund balance? And really, it is one-time expenditures because we don't have a steady funding stream to put into our unassigned, right? It's our leftover money that we have or we may have budgeted to put in there. And so if you think about it for your everyday life, think about when you buy a house or you buy a car, right? When you go out to buy it, you usually have a down payment of some sort, and then you have monthly payments. And so you really wouldn't want to take your monthly payments out of your savings account, because what happens in the end if you're not putting additional funds in there? Eventually you become negative, and then you don't have any money to pay for your car or your house, and then they're going to repo it, which nobody wants that. So when you're talking about these assigned fund balances, unassigned fund balances, or reserve fund balances, that's a little different animal. We'll talk about that. Really, we want to do one-time expenditures out of there, not expenditures that are reoccurring, because then we just run into trouble. Our next fund balance that we need to talk about is our assigned fund balance. At the end of 21-22, we roughly had $7.9 million in there. We are scheduled or have planned to use $2 million of that from our 2015 levy for the 22-23 school year to balance the budget, which leaves $5.9 million in there. Now, in the assigned fund balance is kind of a mix, right? We have roughly about $500,000 that statutorily are required to set aside for a specific purpose, which we can't spend on anything else. It's actually all the donations for each of the sites. We can't spend that. We can't go buy a teacher with it. We can't do anything with it. It's donations. The sites get to decide how they're going to spend it, as long as they're spending it appropriately, how schools can spend their funds. The other $5.4 million of it, $2 million of it, is approximately the remaining money that the board has set aside from our 2015 levy for maintaining class sizes. And then there are other assigned fund balances that we have put in there for technology, iPads, and buildings and grounds, which makes up all of that assigned fund balance. The third fund, which we haven't spoke a lot about at the board table, are the reserve funds. The reason we haven't talked a lot about it, because we can't do a lot with it. In that, all of the money that comes with the reserve funds all have strings attached to them. In that, you can only spend the money in a very specific way. So you can't use it to help put money on the custodial contract or anything like that. Some examples of it are medical assistance. There's a fund balance for that, which there's really limited ways we can spend those funds. There's LTFM, long-term facilities maintenance, which Dan oversees for deferred maintenance within our district. So anything that's in a reserve fund is very restricted, and we can't do a whole lot with it. That's why we generally don't talk about it at the board table, because we don't have many options to spend it on. And then we've had many conversations about our projection model, in which we engaged Ehlers and Associates and used their models. And last board meeting, the board did move ahead and approve our parameters for the model, in which we are leaving our enrollment at 6725, which is what we are saying our enrollment will be for this year. We're using a 3 and 2% on the gen ed formula. We're gonna do a 50% reduction for special ed cross subsidy. There's some multilingual cross subsidy aid of 25%, and average cost of 4.62 and $1.2 million for a compensatory. And when we put that all in, it comes out that we will have a $3 million deficit. Additionally, at the board meeting last time, the board moved ahead with spending $1 million out of that remaining assigned fund balance for class size to buy this down to $2 million, and that $1 million is going towards leaving our staffing ratio the same across the district. So that brought us down to $2 million. And just like any other budget year, we always take a look at the needs within our district to see what else do we need. Obviously, our needs always outweigh our funds, so we try to prioritize what we are going to add back to the budget. And these were also looked at by the administration and are being recommended for the board to approve. The first thing is to reinstate our capital for our buildings and programs. And it was a budget reduction a few years ago where we cut all of their budgets by 50%. And if we continue to do this, we can, but what's gonna happen is we're gonna get so far behind in some of our maintenances and equipment and things that schools need that it will then just become a bigger issue. We continue to see growth in our demographics and our students for our multilingual learners, and we are in need of adding 2 teachers in that area. And then we would like to get to a baseline support for our elementaries, which would consist of a principal, a counselor, and then a student support specialist. And adding all of that together comes to approximately $319,000. And so that is where we come up with the reductions that we've been talking about of roughly $2.4 million. Now, this budget process that we've done this go around has been different but the same that we've done in the past, in that we started this process a lot earlier than we have in previous years. And we really took time and gave people time to look at everything and anything that they wanted to bring to the table for conversations. And we had many good conversations about them, from everything from, well, if we reduce this, is there some place that we can pick up the services? If we change this, who's gonna have more duties to do? Have we reduced those areas in years past? And so we really took time and tried to be very thoughtful in what we were going to bring forward to the board.
And Jane, can I just pause you there? So
Yeah.
just to clarify, every department, every building was asked to participate in this process to,
At the administrative level.
level.
Yes. Yep. Yes. And so the list that you see up on the screen is the list that the administration would like to recommend for the board for realignment, which comes up to roughly $2.4 million. And so at this time, we will take questions. We're going to take turns because, as you know, I'm not the educational specialist. We got those behind me. So depending upon the question will depend upon who will answer it for you.
Yeah, I wondered, thanks for all of your guys' work on this. I know that originally when the discussion started, in partnership with the administration and the finance committee, we were talking about $5 million in reductions. And so I know it's been a lot of your time and a lot of just really thought and commitment that's gone into the list that's brought forward today. I wondered if Jacqueline or Becky, I know you were on last year, like in the fall when we started, and then Becky brought a new perspective, the finance committee, when you started in January, but just wondered from your perspective, kind of being behind the scenes and doing a lot of this legwork, and having the broader picture of kind of where we started to get to this, just how you guys think in terms of kind of what's here. I mean, I know that we're not in a great position, so just everything feels personal, right? Everything affects somebody, but just wanted to get your guys' take about kind of where we started and came from and how you guys are kind of thinking about what's on the table tonight.
Reiterate, nobody, we don't want to do cuts, right? And it does affect someone, somewhere, we don't know, you know what I mean? Who is, so it is personal to someone. So it's not an easy process by any means, but I think from where we started last fall with where we thought we were gonna be as far as making reductions, we made huge, huge strides to get to here. And it was a lot of conversations, and I know the admin team, like the principals and stuff, really came together for their buildings to try to generate ideas of ways they could cut to save money, but I mean, we as the finance committee had to look at the whole big picture. And I think the admin team and Jane and Jason did a really good job of doing try not to word this, as little as possible, you know what I mean? Like, we're trying to do as few cuts as possible to save as much as possible. So it took a long time to get this list, and it wasn't easy, so just please know that, that there was enormous amount of thought that went into this, so.
Yeah, I really appreciate that perspective. Thank you. Just a couple. Oh, go ahead.
Do you have?
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, just to reiterate, we're all, it hurt, when we realize it affects real people and positions, and they may have to, it's hard. Yeah. But you have to make decisions based on facts and, the ebb and flow of students and where those students move between buildings, over, what is hard feelings. Thank you. That's the word I'm looking for.
Thanks, I appreciate that. And I think just going back to our kind of approach as a board broadly was to use a more conservative model. And we've talked a lot about how much what the legislature does can impact us both from potential funding as well as unfunded mandates. So I think just some of the more technical questions I have are as they relate to some of the positions here, like the 360 community worker at the high school. How will students who need that support still access that in the district? Is there a district-wide 360 person, or how will those students be able to get that support?
Yeah, I can take that one. So go way back to about 2011, 2012, and we actually had a 360 worker part-time in all of our buildings. And when we went through that first round of budget reductions, we made the decision at the two middle schools to reduce those positions with the idea that if that family had a sibling at an elementary or at the high school level, they could still receive service. Okay. It also meant that our building counseling staff were going to take on a greater portion of duties to try to connect them with wraparound services within the community. It was difficult, right? I mean, anything that's on this list is going to have an impact, and we're not going to be able to do things to the extent that we were. Since that time, we did add a district social worker that has really helped support students across the district, but I think especially at the high school. I think the thought and idea would be is that we know that there's going to be some additional conversations and support work that's going to have to be done with our high school counseling staff in addition to our district social worker. But those are going to be things to be worked out yet.
Thanks, Chris.
Chris, when was that district social worker? When was that employment made?
I believe we are in our second year of that position.
Okay. Okay, thanks.
Can you tell me what that gap has been at the middle school level, just having the district social worker versus eliminating those 360 positions at those schools?
Yeah, I think one of the things that those positions have had a more natural connection to with a knowledge base are what are the types of economic and housing services that might exist at the county level. How do we get people to access those types of resources in kind of a timely fashion? Housing stability has been a big one. Transportation has been another. And so they do a lot of different things that probably aren't as part of the regular day-to-day operations of a building counselor, but kind of that connection to the county level.
Yeah, I mean, from personal experience, I will tell you that the 360 worker at the high school has been an invaluable resource to our family at times. And so just my opinion, I am not in favor of getting rid of that position. I know that that's up for discussion, but I see that there are going to be huge gaps to our community, and it's an extremely disservice to our students and our community by eliminating that position. And if we've already done it and we're still seeing those gaps, I don't think we should take that leap again. I have another question. Jane, you mentioned that under additional expenses that we're adding in $100,000 for baseline learner support at the elementary level, and we're adding a principal. Which school is that principal going to, since we have a dean and assistant principal?
We're not adding a principal. So the baseline is to make sure that every elementary school has a principal, a counselor, and a student support specialist.
Okay.
Currently at Aiken Road and Aiken Road and Meadowview, they need a 0.5, and North Trail needs a 0.25?
Yep.
Thank you,
So
Lisa.
currently, we're short a 0.25 at Riverview, a 0.5 at Aiken, a 0.5 at Meadowview, and a 1.0 at North Trail to provide that support. And so it's about restructuring. We're moving a couple other positions to make that whole, so to provide that support so that it's consistent baseline.
So everyone has that at a minimum.
Yep, and that was part of the parameters that was approved before.
But these people, they're not like jumping from one school to the other, will they be? Because that seems like that would be hard. Like the position won't work halftime at, I missed all the.
Correct, so we want to.
At Riverview, halftime at FES.
Correct, so we currently have some half times at each of those buildings, and we'd like to make them full-time support
Okay. All right.
specialists.
Because I was like, that would be
Yep.
difficult for
Yep.
everyone.
Mhm.
Can you talk about the math interventionists at the middle school? I know you and I have had conversations about this and just how that might look in terms of support with those positions going and the students who are currently receiving support through that mechanism.
Yeah, so those positions were added quite some time ago as part of an enhancement package once upon a time. And through COVID, the variation of the models have looked a little bit different depending on the middle school that they were at. And what we believe is that we can strategically work to schedule students not only in math classes based on a lot of performance data, but then also transitions classes. So every 6th, 7th, and 8th grader is required to take a transitions class. And it's a model that we've used in the past to say, well, we're going to go and take an identified group of learners, a cluster, within a particular class and potentially cluster them with a math teacher that's teaching that course to help provide some additional support. In addition, both middle schools do use a flex model. where they can create a number of different course offerings that students can either select from or students can be selected into based on various needs throughout the course of the school year.
Okay. Thanks, Chris.
What other things do the students do in a transition course?
So really, the original design of the transitions course was we had elementary students coming to us without necessarily a lot of the skills to be successful as independent learners. And when we did the redesign back in about 2015, we made that a required 6th grade course. So it was all about skills that students need about how do I organize my materials, how do I manage my workflow, how do I advocate for myself? And what we found is that through the pandemic is that we actually had a greater need to expand that in grades 7 and 8. And so that's a course that meets every other day for 88 minutes. Built within that is, I'll say, some independent work time for students that can kind of navigate their workflow as well. So it meets a wide variety of needs, and a number of different people do teach that.
So if we have a cluster of students specifically, maybe at different levels, but have a need for math specifically, they would go into a math transition course?
I don't think we would call it a math transition course, but we might either A, like I mentioned, if we have a math teacher who has an open period in their schedule, have them be the one to have that cluster of students. Or if they happen to have a particular grade level cluster that has a math class that's happening, maybe across the hallway or something, that they could receive some additional support or intervention by stopping into that classroom.
Chris, just to clarify, there are also some other curriculum goals within the transitions course as the students age up through 7th and 8th grade that kind of fit more of a typical what you would think is like something the counselor would teach and other life skills, interpersonal skills, correct?
Yeah, like for example, both middle schools around the 7 mindsets, that's an area where they can kind of work to reinforce a lot of that curriculum that's taking place. So definitely a wide variety of experiences for learners.
You mentioned if teachers, sorry, you mentioned if teachers have open time. I mean, I guess that begs the question, how much orchestration are you expecting to have to do to make that happen? Because, I mean, it's sort of the way it was worded. I mean, if they happen to, but what if they don't? Because that does suggest that we're going to be missing that transition, that intentionality, and particularly with those students who are struggling with math, to give them the support in the absence of a more dedicated resource. I just want to make sure I'm articulating that really clearly.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's a lot of the data that's actually, or data analysis that's taking place right now, is that our middle school principals, they'll take a look at historical NWEA and to some extent MCA data to identify, do we have learners coming to us from the elementary level and how do they scaffold out? And then from there, those are typically the first decisions that we make as part of building a master schedule, is what are all those prioritized needs? And these can be for special services, it can be for speech language, it can be for math, literacy, multilingual, on and on and on. And then how do we place those learners first into identified sections and lock them in? Because those are the most difficult ones to try to schedule after the fact. And so once we feel like we've identified all of those needs and we've placed them, I think, to the best of our ability that our schedule allows, then we go through and we schedule everybody else that doesn't have like really specific needs within a schedule. So that's the work that takes place with working with our elementary teachers, our elementary administrators, all of our special services staff to identify what those needs are and how we best place them.
Do we then communicate with families that their kids are being put into that kind of a group together? Because one of the things that I've just experienced myself too is the disconnect or the opportunity to be disconnected as a parent from, you know, one of my kids who struggles particularly with math and kind of needs that level of support. So I do think about this, you know, through a personal experience lens. And now I think about the extra complexity that's being added into this matrix, and it also gives me some concerns.
Yeah, so the communication piece would be definitely something that we would, I think, be intentional about. I think back to when we would do our schedule picture days, kind of the unveiling of what the student schedule would be. One example of one of those intervention opportunities at Dodge Middle School is like a team-taught literacy course, where it is we've got 3 sections, 1 at each grade level, and it is team-taught between the building literacy specialist and a grade level language arts teacher. Those we intentionally try to keep the number starting out a little bit smaller, knowing that we are going to have students that move in and out of our system, and we need to have availability for them. But definitely around this, if there's going to be a change in what the programming looks like, is that we can be more intentional with our communication.
So you said you're using NWEA and MCA data. Through past school board meetings that I've listened to, I've heard that the MC data is not valid. Well, I shouldn't say valid.
Flawed.
I should say that it's not necessarily accurate, if that's a better way to put it. So I'm curious how we're using the data that we find not accurate to now try to place students into special needs. And furthermore, as the student progresses, let's say they start into 6th grade, how are we going to monitor that those needs won't change? Because you're saying students without needs won't be, they'll be placed last, but doesn't every school or every student have maybe a need somewhere? I wouldn't think that every student is, I mean, there's probably a handful that are, but and every student is going to be exceptional at every subject.
Yeah, so those are just two of the pieces of information that we use as part of our, I think, decision-making model. Our counselors and our admin go to each of the elementary schools and they have conversations with 5th grade staff, and we walk through every kid and we say, tell us a little bit more about this learner. What are the supports that they need? What are considerations that we need to be mindful of? It's a scheduling tool, but one of the things that we know is that we've got the ability to put restrictions and parameters in place to say that, you know, this student maybe should not be placed with this particular student. And it's a mechanism that we can use for that. We also work with our elementary principals on, you know, asking them to work with their teachers that teach math and say, okay, here's what the data says. That's one small piece, but based on your experiences, are there learners that might be ready for some sort of advanced math programming? Are there some learners that, due to certain conditions, that the data maybe is telling a little bit of a inaccurate story right now? So a student that might need more math intervention, but the data would suggest maybe that they don't. So there's a lot of those pieces that we work as we try to collect data on our incoming learners. And then those conversations, once they get into 6th grade, we have our 6th grade staff actually come to us and say, you know, based off of the first, you know, half of a trimester, I think this is a learner that maybe needs this or doesn't need this. And so we've got the ability, even within the system, to take a look at the changes that we can make in a more, I think, more advanced fashion, as opposed to waiting to like natural terms, if you will.
Not to pile on, but in that kind of same, we're talking about incoming 6th graders. How do we deal with kids as they're moving to 7th and 8th grade and then into the high school, right? Because there's opportunities at every level for someone to accelerate or for someone to fall behind. And that's the core responsibility. So I mean, I think with the board and what I hear in these questions is wanting to hear a lot of confidence that, you know, I'm talking about a little complexity. We're talking about other kids. I think we want to hear that there's, you know, confidence, and how do we know we're succeeding, and how, you know, confidence that we're able to manage that really effectively, and how do we know that we're succeeding, and then what do we do if we find out that something's falling short? That's what I'm hearing in the questions here at the table.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so part of our model at the middle level is we do have a daily team planning period that teams come together and they have a lot of authentic conversations around learners. And so I'll use 6th grade as an example, right? So they've got their roughly, you know, 230 to 290 6th grade students that come in. They have the conversations based on what are we seeing in terms of learner readiness, what types of traits are we seeing? Do we have any students that are exhibiting any concerns with lack of engagement in school in general, particular subjects in general? What information do we have about their previous school experiences, their current life conditions? And then what do we do to intervene and adapt? You know, and it might be as simple as a tier 1 intervention that's applied across the whole classroom. And that, I'll give you the example, that's that transitions. We determined that a lot of our learners coming out of the pandemic needed to have more intentional time around getting back to resilience. And so we changed that and made that kind of a required course in grades 6, 7, and 8. So that's something that we do quite frequently. I will say in the area of math, we do some grouping and regrouping. I would say that even before Try 1, our 6th grade math teachers will come in and say, okay, based off of the initial placement, here's where we think some learners maybe need to be shuffled around. And then with that, it always involves conversations with the family because, whenever you move one piece, it's going to have impacts on other areas. And impacts might be that they've built relationships with a group of learners or a group of teachers. And the family might say, you know what, I'm willing to wait until a different point in time to do an acceleration. I would think some of the more difficult ones are, and they're not very frequent, are if we happen to get a learner in who maybe needs to be double accelerated in math. Because that's a much more complex piece when you're starting to integrate cross grade level courses. And I would say most of those decisions are typically made in late elementary to early middle school. It's not very often that we have a learner that's in 7th grade or even in 8th that we're making that decision. We've done it before, and then we work with the high school on what are the combination middle school, high school courses to make that happen. And it's more complex, but what ends up happening is that learner will actually, I'll say, lose some middle school experiences, but gain some high school elective experiences to make that math piece work, and usually that works out fine.
One thing I'd like to add is when you get to the high school level, it all kind of works out because we have courses called concepts. So any of the courses that are required for graduation, so Algebra 1, Geometry, and Algebra 2, you can take concepts, which is the same class, but just extended over 3 trimesters instead of just 2. So it slows it down for the pace for learners who may need that type of support. But then also, if you would like to become double advanced, depending on where you are in the math cycle, your freshman or sophomore year, you can partner up Geometry and Algebra 2 and take those the same school year, and then become go from on-level math to a year ahead, or if you're already a year ahead, you can go 2 years ahead. And so even those learners who may start start double advanced prior, then they kind of will be more with their peers later on too. So it all kind of fixes itself at the high school level to more kind of what you need without that specific position, if that's kind of what you're looking for.
Yeah. Thanks, Kennedy.
Well, I just really appreciate your patience in talking us through all of that, because we would have to have this if there were 18 other things on this list that, what's the plan, and, how are we going to adjust for this, because everything, as was mentioned before, has an effect. And so appreciate all the thought that's gone into, not just where we're at now, but there's a lot of contingency planning, what happens if, but also knowing that what we land with for a final budget in June could be very different, but one way or the other. And so just really appreciate how much time and energy goes into this. And I just want to kind of sidebar and thank the staff who've reached out to us as a board and have shared their perspective as teachers. I know that we've received emails about the importance of each of these roles within their schools. My kids are at Riverview, and so I see Vicki all the time. She's so active there, and we've gotten emails, about her and the paras and just everyone. But I think broadly speaking, the Finance Committee and administration, I can see looking at this, did a really thoughtful job, because the distribution with the way things are spread out, it touches everywhere. It's elementary, it's middle school, it's high school, it's athletics, it's administration. So I just really appreciate that, and just want to recognize that the perspective is heard and appreciated, because we know each of these positions, from the custodial position to the teaching and learning coach, to all of them play a really important role. And again, we'd all much rather not have to have any of these conversations. A more technical question, though, and this came through today, so it was a question that one of the media paras posed, and I thought that this was a really valuable question around the reduction from 30 to 20, and how not just the impact on salary or wages, but also that makes them not benefit eligible. And since we've had such a difficult time filling our para positions, I just wondered if this is something, if things land more positively, that one of the areas that we're considering maybe, I know that she specifically said, could we reduce to 25? Obviously, dollar for dollar, we wouldn't have the same reduction, but if there's flexibility or ways that we might want to think about that, just because as a board, again, I know we've been working hard to try and improve our benefit balance across our professional groups. as well as fill all of the para needs that we have in our buildings. So I
Yeah,
would just
that's-
put that out there.
Yeah, I saw that note before we got in here today too, and I think the other side of that, she alluded to it, I think she was very focused on some of the personal impact, but she also alluded to something else that I've heard, that reducing 10 hours in the elementary media centers isn't allotting enough time to actually get the work done, and that's putting extra pressure on the media specialist. So there's two things that come out in that. There's either reduction in reading and resources to students, or yeah, I'm not sure exactly I'm not actually exactly sure how that gets made up, other than putting that additional burden back on the media specialist. And I don't know if the elementary principals who are in the audience here dare speak up or
Maybe,
or feel
maybe I
comfortable,
could
feel-
address the benefit questions first.
that'd be great.
And then
there's-
maybe
there's two.
Mrs. Edwards could address the other question.
Thanks, that'd be great.
So all of our paraprofessionals who are going to be reduced due to this agenda item will have the opportunity to have up to 30 hours a week of a position in the school district. And so it is quite likely that with the number of paraprofessional positions we have open in special ed, for example, they might split a position up and give them 10 hours of special ed and 20 hours of media. They might give them 10 hours of kindergarten para. They might give them, offer them 30 hours of a special ed. So everybody on that list will have the opportunity, if they so choose, to work 30 hours. It might just be a little bit different assignment. Well, it will be a different assignment than what they've had in the past.
Well, that's important. That's
Yeah.
important.
Yeah.
If they didn't understand that, hopefully they find comfort in that.
Yep, and I'll work with them when we get a little bit closer to the end of the school year, because there's always a lot of changes in the hourly staff by the end of the school year. So we don't do it at this time. It's just a little bit too early, but yep, they will have that opportunity.
Okay, thanks for clarifying.
And as for your question, is putting pressure on other people, I think all of these cuts puts extra pressure on everybody, unfortunately. So there isn't anything up there that doesn't put more onto someone else to try to help lessen that impact, unfortunately. And so it is a very tough decision and was discussed quite a bit by our elementary principals and talking about where can that workload go. It isn't necessarily all going to go right back onto the ITL specialist. It'll be spread out and looking at what duties, prioritizing what needs to get done, and maybe things that have been getting done that no longer are necessary at this time.
Okay, so reevaluation of the responsibilities. Okay.
So
I
when
can
you
hear
say
that.
that, does that mean that our learners are going to experience, I mean, I heard you say that they have an opportunity for more hours in different roles, but what about the learners that, the one thing that she had mentioned in her note to us was that getting those books out to students, they have readers that are sometimes fast readers. So how are we, if we don't have enough time in the day for them to do their job, how are we getting those books back out to our learners?
Right, and so that might not be one of the needs that we're saying would get cut, right? So she is expressing that she doesn't know what that role will look like or the reevaluation of the duties. So it would be looking at and prioritizing that. Obviously, books in their media centers are very important pieces of that.
Yeah, we
Position.
push reading in this district
Yeah.
very hard. Okay,
Yep.
thank you.
Yeah.
I just have one more thing just to put for consideration as we move forward. Probably the least important piece of it, just because it, in terms of personnel impact, definitely makes sense why it's on there, but just the Panorama survey, this is one of the surveys that I think as a board, in the time that I've been on, we've talked about the value of this survey and the data that it does supplement that's district specific, compared to some of our standardized tests from the state, that this one has had some value. And so it would just, again, be hopeful broadly that we're in a better position come June than we do. But I think an opportunity for us when we have our board workshop to really talk about data and sources of data and what types of data we're, looking at as a district to at least consider what is coming from the Panorama survey, if that's duplicated elsewhere, or pieces that we're getting elsewhere, but just being thoughtful about the investment that we've made into that and how if we discontinue that at this time, we lose the opportunity to show longitudinal changes over time in some of these areas, so.
This is a question that I kind of saw when I first saw it with the Panorama survey. I was just curious, a lot of times a lot of students, including myself, we don't really understand what it's for. So I was just wondering if anyone could answer kind of what the purpose of it is. Because I know a lot of times there are students who kind of just go through it, which you'll get that with any test, and it does good today, but I'm just curious as to what that's providing you all with.
Great question.
Yeah, so the survey's taken by students in grades 3 through 12, and we get 2 administrations, a fall administration, and then 1 in May. And that survey started, I believe, in the fall of 2020 was the first administration of it. And the intent behind it was to really get an idea of the social emotional state of our school. Really try to get an idea of how do students view their connection to school, how do they view their connection to staff, what do they see as their strengths? What do they see as their limitations? And so we open up that data to our classroom teachers, to our interventionists, to our school counselors, our school administration. And what they can simply do is they can look for growth or any type of trend really that might be happening at that building. And so that's been something that I know, for example, recently just based off of some PD sessions that staff at, I believe, FES and Dodge were kind of digging into their data, saying, what does it tell us? What does it not tell us? Who are the learners that maybe are starting to appear a little bit more at risk? And then how do we intervene on behalf of that? And so it does allow you to grab a lot of that information in ways that before we hadn't really found a good way to be able to do it with our district scorecard, so.
And the Minnesota Student Survey, which is only every 2 years, every 3 years now. So those are huge gaps between when we're getting that type of information, because that's the one that I think beyond our academic ones sometimes gets into a little bit more of the social emotional, but 3 years is a long time. We can have entire groups almost go out of the high school and get a new group in before we get, good information that allows us to act in real time, I think, to make changes. So thanks for that explanation, Chris. Thank you. Good question, Ken.
As I looked through, the only item on the agenda that I felt like I needed a little clarification on was kind of the big bucket here, which was the shifting technology staff expenditures to capital. It's vague and it's a lot of money. What does that mean?
Sure, absolutely. So it is roughly 834,000 of it has to do with our iPad payments. So our iPads are totally paid for, so we won't have a payment coming up in the 23-24 school year. And in order to reach our budget target of 2.4, we rounded it up to $1 million. And those funds come out of our capital fund. Yep. And that is one of those buckets that falls in our reserve fund. So there are certain things that you can pay for out of there. And one of the items, one of the areas that we're able to use our capital dollars on is within technology. And so what we'll be doing is looking at some of our technology expenditures that are currently in our general fund and moving them 1 year into our capital fund for that relief in our general fund.
That's great. I mean, that's nearly half of the budget right there. And that, just so I remember the history correctly, that was the result of really good prior planning, correct?
Yeah, so what happens is we do have money in our assigned fund balance. So let's say the last time we renewed our iPads, we got a phenomenal deal. Apple really came through for us. We did have conversations with them for the 22-23 school year. It did not come into our favor on form factor and different things of that sort, so we opted not to move forward with that. But if for some reason iPad comes out with their big announcement this fall, that is just something for us to jump on and they give us a great deal like they did last time. We do have money in our assigned fund balance to pay for that first year payment. And that's why we felt comfortable with using those dollars differently for the 23-24 school year.
And unlike other districts, this that is primarily funded out of our fund balance as opposed to a separate technology levy. And that's the
Correct.
comparison that's different between our
Yep.
neighbors.
Yep, absolutely. If you remember, we had a graph up there of, I can't remember how many districts, but I know like almost all of the surrounding districts around us have a technology levy, and we do not.
I asked that same question, actually. I was on the same, one question I did have, I did get Jason's response to that, but by moving it over to the capital funds, does that now open that up for us to be able to go out for a capital tech levy? And I think he answered that as a yes, but I just want to clarify that.
So a tech levy, you can go out whenever you want. You don't necessarily have to have certain expenditures in a certain bucket. What you have to do for your technology levy is you have to go out to your voters to get it approved. And you want to have it a dollar amount that you're currently spending. So, right, so we wouldn't go out and say we want a $5 million technology levy because we don't spend $5 million currently. So we would take a look at how much we're currently spending and say, okay, you know, if we could do $1 million, that would alleviate $1 million in our general fund that we could use for the technology. We don't have to spend a certain amount in our capital fund in order to go out for a tech levy. It's just a question we have to pose to our voters.
Thank you.
And that is just a shift for just this year. So
Just this
it's
year.
not,
Yeah, so if you think.
if the financial picture doesn't change much, we'll be back at the same needing to put $1 million somewhere else next year.
Correct. Absolutely. It's a Band-Aid. It is not a fix.
Yeah, I think if you think about the time frame, and you're thinking, we're all going down the same path, right? This is a shift. Is it really temporary? What happens in 2 years when we're in a similar situation? I think if you gameplay, or you sort of war game out scenarios in your head, like I do sometimes, you think about where you're going and say, okay, so in 2024, or in the next 2 years, we need to go out for an operating levy anyway, right? Our current operating levy expires in 2025, correct? Right, so we have an operating levy that was passed in 2015, those are authorized for 10 years, it expires in 2025. So sometime in the next couple of years, the district needs to go out for an operating levy renewal, probably at a higher rate to match current expenses, and, you know, we'll go through all that process, right? And that would be then a time you might say, here's the operating levy, we also need a technology levy, because we'd be going out to the voters with a number of different questions around funding requirements, and that would make, I mean, I'm not committing the board or the district to doing some things, but you're asking the questions that lead you down to that path. It's probably a fair thing to assume and have right in our heads as we think through the next 2 years about the different types of levies and expenses and requests that we're going to have to make to voters to continue to adequately fund the district, right?
Yes.
Fair.
And those will all be conversations and decisions you'll need to make.
And I'm not sure that cutting $1 million helps us avoid that right now, because that's the
Correct.
alternative that's on the table, right? If you don't do this, we need to find another $1 million in the budget, right?
Absolutely.
Everything we talk about, everything from paras to,
Schools, athletics.
the levy, sorry, what's the survey called?
Panorama.
I try not to say paranormal, but that's what was in my head. But all of those things, I mean, we can be opposed to those, but everything, to restore any single one of those requires us to find another cut someplace else. And anyways, I just kind of playing that out, because I understand where the questions are going, and that's certainly, you know, some of the questions I had too, and the conversations I had with Jason in the meantime. But we as board members do really need to be thinking about, where does this all go, right? It's not just a transactional decision in front of us in the next 2 weeks. It's what are we saying today leads to the next decision tomorrow. So anyway, I appreciate the questions. It's awesome. I don't know if there are any others about. Okay.
I don't, just thanks again.
So my understanding is, Andrew, tomorrow you said there'll be information being sent out to families? Yes, that's correct. Okay, so more of this will be communicated more broadly with the rest of the district. I think tomorrow, we've got 2 weeks until this is a conversation, we're not making a decision tonight. So there are probably still some conversations that may take place in the next 2 weeks. And I guess that's it for this item for tonight. Correct?
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jane. So our next item on the agenda is, let me get back to here. Conversation around student conduct and safety. And, you know, this is something that, this is a topic, it's a general topic, and I think, you know, the point here, I'll kind of introduce it, I guess. But this is a topic that's been growing. I think it's certainly in my mind. You know, we hear constantly about the negative impact of pandemic-era policies on student conduct at all grade levels. I've been to a couple of the elementary schools. I've been to Dodge. You know, in every one of my conversations with principals, I ask basically two questions that are leading to issues that we're talking about. One of them is, you know, how are student behaviors this year? Last year was, we were glad to be normal. This year, we're still kind of glad to be normal, and it's still not quite normal, right? Where I think there's a lot going on in our classrooms. And so, you know, we understand that the shutdowns and some of the other things really hurt academic and social behavior and development, right? So then we come to more recent reports from students, teachers, and families about, you know, an apparent increase in student conflicts at the high school. And yeah, really kind of centralized there, but, you know, that sort of, to me, predicates more urgency in wanting to really understand the issues. Certainly, I think every board member has kind of talked about this to some degree. And so anyway, so we come here. And so, you know, there's been some other issues too, but I think what I want this conversation at the board table to be is, we can't dive into the data. We didn't ask for research to be done. In order for the board to do work, we need to ask the administration to do some things. There's kind of a process for how this works. But I saw, you know, what I want to have for this discussion is determine how we might move forward with a further examination of issues, you know, and what the scope of that work might look like and what the desired outcomes would be. So, you know, I've kind of framed some of the key items that I have in mind. I'll open it up for discussion. Again, this conversation is about what are the concerns, getting the concerns out on the table and starting to try to frame the work.
Do you want to share what you started as a starting point?
As long as I'm talking, do you want to keep talking? Sure. You know, so there's a couple of items that I think will pop into this. I mean, some of it's attendance issues, some of it's building security. My thoughts are that we would, you know, what I think is needed is sort of a data-driven analysis. I mean, things that I want to understand are, what are the types of complaints we're seeing across each of the buildings? What do we know about who is subject to or reporting various incidences? What do we know about who is allegedly committing these incidences? What does the process and practice look like? I mean, we talk about policy from a lot of different angles, but what does it actually look like in practice? Because I see it through a keyhole occasionally, but I think we kind of want to, what does that look like in action? And then what are the outcomes kind of from a longitudinal view and from a demographic view? You know, I guess my point is, for me to start making decisions or really understand what's going on, I need to move past the conjecture and really understand the facts of what we're dealing with and sort of also understand the context of the contributing factors that kind of go into everything. And then from there, I think we as a board can work to identify and work with the administration to identify any gaps in policy, or kind of also continue to work with and improve practices and procedures generally. So yes, I was prepared for that, but
Well, thanks.
I was hoping to open up the conversation before it.
Well, it's always nice to have something to react to if
Yeah, there you go.
someone's got some
React away.
thoughts. Yeah. I mean, that sounds like a great starting point to me. I think just for clarification for anyone listening, you said who is responsible or having these incidences. We don't mean individuals, where that's not a privacy issue. It
correct,
means
yeah.
broadly, like nothing would be.
Yeah, I don't want to dig into the
I'm
specific.
just clarifying.
Well, I mean, occasionally we need to, but I don't, this is, you know, my objective around this is not a dive into the specifics of every little case, but I do want to understand from a data perspective, are we seeing an increase in conflicts?
Right, yeah.
Are we seeing, you know, certain types of people targeted? Are we seeing a misuse of disciplinary policies? Some of that stuff's been alleged over the last year and a half too. But I don't have a baseline to really understand what's going on. And I think it would be helpful, also to kind of get at some of these other broader issues that I think the district cares about. Anyway.
Yep. I agree. I knew you
Important
didn't mean
clarifying
that.
question.
Yep, that's why I was just making sure everyone knew that we meant broadly. Yeah.
Who would you see would be the best people to inform you of these questions?
Okay, so it's not me. I'm just a member, just like anyone else, right? I organize the meetings and I administer the meetings. That's all the chair does, okay? But I do, like, you're asking how would we do the work, right? That's actually an important part of the question, right? And one thing I might think about is, do we appoint an ad hoc committee, right? So one thing a board can do, we've got standing committees, and we can also appoint ad hoc committees. 2 members of this board to take the questions that we identify here and go forth and work with the administration to get answers to those questions. And just like the finance committee, the policy committee, or the other, community engagement, or anything else, come back to the board with, here's what we're finding out, and here's some things that we think are answers, or, maybe there's no answer. Maybe everything is just great, but at least we start to get a baseline and a level of facts to continue to work from going forward. That help?
That's my next question, is the why. Like, we get these answers to these facts, and then what is the why of doing this?
The why is to diagnose whether we have a problem. Honestly, I think that's it, because I've heard so many things. Yeah, I think that's it. That's my point of getting past conjecture to really understanding facts, really understanding what's going on in our district.
And is this all around safety-driven? Or is it more than just safety?
It can be all of that, yeah. It certainly is safety-driven.
I mean, obviously, I have the same safety concerns. That's why I put
But I want to
numerous
go back.
items up for discussion.
I also want to go back to where I started too. I mean, we've heard about how pandemic policies have disrupted kids, their behavior and their development, right? And how is that translating? Like I said, I've been to different schools and I hear that there are continued major needs. What is the trend and kind of where is this stuff going on? It's a great question. The why. Why would we do? What's the outcome? I think that's where we want to get to, because I'm not exactly sure what's an anecdote from what's really a verified, fact-based, this is what's going on in the district. I mean, I'm also interested to know how our district differs from what's going on in other districts, but that's not something I think we can solve. I just think we can understand what's going on in our world.
I think there is value in us with as much privacy as would need to be respected in this situation of knowing, what degree of punishments are handed out, how many students are affected, what's violent, what's considered violent. And I know that we can't let that information be known to the general public on a student-by-student basis, but an overall trend, I think the community wants it, and as board members, it is something that's important to all of us. I question how, if we're able to get that data, how can it be shared? Who can it be shared with? I think Jason is probably the person to answer this. He's not available to talk with it, but I do think that a separate subcommittee to learn more of those idiosyncrasies is necessary and is probably a good idea for an ongoing board role.
Yeah, I'm fairly confident that we can access the data. The board has more privilege to data than I think some recognize. Policy 515, I think it is, that details how student information is handled, and we are the terms that are in that policy are school officials with a instructional purpose, right? Defining this as, we are school officials, and then I believe that this is an instructional purpose,
I think a lot of it also falls under policy committee. How can we write policies or know our policies are working if we don't understand what's happening?
Right.
Yep, and that's the educational purpose, right? So we're really understanding. There's lots of reasons why this kind of fits in.
I think, Kyle and I both serve on that policy committee, and what we're feeling, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, Kyle, I don't want to speak for you, but what I'm feeling is that there are things happening in our schools, and the board doesn't know about it. They're severe enough that I think we should be notified about it. And then what action was taken, we don't know about it. We have to put our trust that the policies are being adhered to, but are the policies even working?
Right.
So how do we know that? if we don't know what is happening. So, I mean, I don't care if you label the kid John Doe and Jane Smith, I just want to know, are our policies working and are they being followed right now? So,
My assumption that a safety and discipline subcommittee, it seems to me like it would be an extension of the policy committee that's already in place. I'm not sure if it's worth forming a separate group when I feel like those knowledge of those two things are so critical for the policy committee to actually be able to serve in their role that I would support that either being renamed or integrated into that role.
okay.
I disagree. I would rather have at least one other member on that committee outside of policy committee. That's just me.
I'd love to know why.
To be honest, I'm still trying to wrap my head around like where this is coming from and why, because you're talking about getting through conjecture, and I feel like we're just taking gossip and fear mongering and social media stuff that is conjecture to drive this. And so I feel like we're riding a very fine line of management and policy, and I feel like it's a slippery slope. We have to trust, like, management is not our role, right? Policy is. So we have to trust our admin and the superintendent that they are following policy. And do I think we need to know all of the ins and outs of all the behavior issues that happen at schools? No, absolutely not. It's not our place, right? Can they tell us, yep, like, here's the disciplinary action that happened, this was the policy that we followed? Yes, we should be able to have that information, but
I want to be really clear about something. I'm not asking for even case studies of individual disciplinary actions. I really just want to know number of incidences. What types of incidences in categorical terms were they? How were they met at, kind of, and it's like, in school, how many in-school suspensions, how many detentions, how many, I'm not even sure if I'm using the right outcomes to describe this. I want to be very clear. I'm not asking to dive into any specific instance. I want to understand, do we have a trend issue? Are we collecting data that helps us understand and identify trends?
and then what?
And then what is, you're right. I mean, some of this was
We're
born from
giving
the,
a task to a group of people to do work, but for what reason? That's my, and if we're gonna form a committee, I definitely want to sit on it, because that's what
Yeah.
I'm struggling with right now, so.
So I can tell you from personal experience, being a mother in the district, and my daughter had an incident happen at the high school, they did not follow policy. So this isn't rumors and gossip, this is hard facts.
Okay, I'm not discounting your incident, that's again, one incident, so. And
But
we
if it
have,
happened to me, I can guarantee you it happened to other parents.
I think we can all anecdotally share someone we
Yes,
know
I'm not-
personally that
Yes.
says, the question should be raised.
Exactly. So I think it's very important to know this. Jacqueline, I'd be interested to know if our school goes on a lockdown, would you want to know as a school board member?
do I think as a school board member, well, we are notified when schools go on lockdown.
Modified lockdowns?
Typically, yes, and parents are usually notified via email too.
Modified lockdowns?
I don't
Anyone
think-
answer
If
that?
there's a lockdown for like a
don't-
medical emergency for a student, no, we don't need to know that. That doesn't affect us. Like, if someone's having a medical situation in the school and they want to keep the hallways clear, they don't need to send an email out to
Well,
parents.
there's other
for that.
reasons besides
I
medical that's a
understand
modified
that,
lockdown.
but I'm not gonna nitpick each of them, but no, I don't think every single instance that happens at a building, I need to be made aware of, just because I'm a board member.
From my perspective as a student, someone who experiences this on the daily, I'm just trying to, I'm trying to figure out if this is more safety or disciplinary focus, because it kind of seems like, in my opinion, those are two kind of separate things. Whereas in my K-11 experience, that I can remember at least, ever felt unsafe in the building, a lack of supports. I know there's always teachers, administration, like our principals and assistant principals and intern principals, just always around the halls and things like that. If that's specific at the high school level, there's always that sense of like, there's someone I can go to, whether it's privately, things like that. But disciplinary action, that's something you don't see as much as a student. And that is something that's kind of out of our hands. But when it comes to safety, especially with all the things where they're constantly like, use the correct doors so that people who aren't supposed to be in the building don't get in the building and things like that. Like, from those standpoints, I just feel like they're very separate.
Point, thank you, Kennedy.
Thanks. What I hear other members asking for is they'd like information that they can use to decide if there needs to be a subcommittee or potential examination of policies. I don't think there's harm in getting the data that you're proposing. I think what we choose to do with it still needs a lot of decision-making.
that's fair.
I would agree.
So then we as a board need to figure out who we're posing that question to. I feel like that's a superintendent question, that he should have access to the data and potentially gathering it from
Yeah,
principal
I'll-
support if needed.
Agreed, yeah, absolutely,
Right?
yeah,
So
ultimately.
do
I
we
think we're
have
also
it?
just trying to figure out as a board, do we all agree that we need some level of information to make these decisions on policy regarding safety, disciplinary action, whatever it is in policy? Again, I think we're kind of feeling that there's a lot of lack of information that is not allowing us to do our job.
I just want to add that I think such a deep dive into policy and safety and discipline and safety, to make sure policy is being implemented, that it's being consistent, that it's effective, is also like a key to like, we don't want to jump into management. Like, you know, we have to trust that our administration, superintendent, they're doing their job in management, but like, our job is also to hold them accountable to like, you know, we made these policies. We want to make sure that you're implementing them, you know, and, you know, like, are they flawed? Could we improve them? So.
Yeah, it's checks and balances. That's what any
Yeah.
employer would do, a boss would do, you know what I'm saying?
And because I'm on the community engagement committee, the lens I'm kind of thinking about is just related to kind of the broader strategies that we've talked about, both as it relates to the narrative around our schools and our community, because there is so much misinformation through social media that people latch onto. And so because we're trying to be intentional about what and how we tell the story of how our students feel, because that is important and that's what we're all here for, I think is helpful to find the facts and again, just to be able to have a conversation as a board about, right, now that we know this, is this something that parents want to better understand? Because I can say, just from my perspective too, as an elementary school or a parent of elementary schoolers, I understand how those stories can feel like fact, because you might live here and only know two parents, and if one parent said, my child had a negative experience when they went to middle school, you might feel like, I don't know who to go to, or I don't know if that's representative. And so I appreciate the desire to have a better understanding of what the facts are, while also really appreciating what Jacqueline shared just about our framework is around radical trust, and where does that intersect with accountability, right? The only person that we hire and oversee as a board is the superintendent. And so and then it's his job to oversee everyone else, and if the policies are implemented. So I do believe the data is probably available, and that, you know, that there's a deeper understanding, and that we just, haven't had a chance to dig into it as a board. I'm really looking forward to our discussion at our workshop, because this is kind of one of the things just broadly that, as it relates to helping us understand where our schools are academically and where students are at social emotionally, that this feels like another piece of understanding as a board. So
It's easy to get hyper-focused on finance this time of year, so I think raising the question to the superintendent as, you know, an upfront timeline for when we would like a report on those things. Would it be possible for you to put together we request these specific things for all of us to review and give feedback before it's submitted?
Yeah, maybe that's a good next step. Maybe if I can recommend this, that maybe the executive committee talks to Jason in one of our next meetings and outline what the parameters of the research might look like.
Okay.
Share that for feedback with members of the board.
Sure.
And then once that's defined, then go forth
Okay.
from that point.
I think overall, I would like, and the community members that I talk to would like some bit of a presentation on those things that would be for public consumption
Right, yeah, I agree.
in this setting. Okay.
I agree. Okay. Anything else? Okay. All right. well, that's the end of the work session topics. The next item, actually, we've got administrative action to award the contract for the Aiken Road Elementary Loading Dock project.
Oh, hey, Dan.
Good evening. Thank you, Chair Christensen, members of the board, members of the community. I'll be relatively brief here, but just as a reminder, just have a couple of somewhat small projects that we're looking to move forward with this summer. This is the second project, our Aiken Road loading dock kind of reconfiguration, so to speak. To kind of manage our existing challenges at that site. So we did take this out for bid. Bids came back last Tuesday afternoon. We had bid opening. It was favorable, so it was good news. Our bids came in basically right about what we had projected, so we were pretty spot on with our budget estimates. And so the document that I included in the board packet illustrates that. And so basically looking for board approval to move forward with awarding the contract. Sorry, I should be able to read that from here, but I can't remember that. I know it's a bit of a Goodmanson, right? Goodmanson, yes. And so there was a base bid as well as an alternate bid as part of that. The alternate bid is needed as a result of some additional electrical work and electrical service relocation from Dakota Electric. And we put it in there as an option for us to have this contractor perform that work. We believe at this point in time that is our best kind of guaranteed option. I believe I did mention that there is the possibility that we may be able to find a better option. The city is working on a pretty significant repaving project in the immediate vicinity. And so I have reached out to the city of Farmington. We've got an agreement. Well, once they've named their paving contractor for the Aiken Road project, I will make contact with them and see if there's some way. You know, a lot of times it has to do with, material acquisition and proximity and that sort of thing. So there is the possibility that perhaps we could negotiate a better deal with a contractor that would be readily available to do this type of work. We just wanted to lock this in as a guaranteed, but we can, if the work isn't performed, there's options to kind of adjust the contracted, budget. So
just for clarification, Dan, that potential that would only affect the alternate?
That is correct.
Correct, okay.
Yep, that is correct. Yep, so if there are any other additional questions, I'd be happy to try to answer those. Otherwise, there is
I know we discussed this at the last meeting, so I don't have any questions. All right, so can I get a motion?
I'll make a motion to award the contract for the Aiken Road Elementary Loading Dock project to Goodmanson Construction in the amount of $221,500 as presented.
Second.
Motion by Simmons, second by Doyle. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. Contract is awarded. Our final item is some policy discussion. We reviewed Policy 506 on student discipline, Policy 514 on bully prohibition, and Policy 522, Title IX sex non-discrimination policy. Melissa, I've been talking all night. Can you?
What would you like me to say?
Trying to put you on the spot.
Yeah.
We met on these things a couple weeks ago, and I don't remember any, on these three policies, significant issues. I mean, it's mostly MSBA.
Yeah, so Policy 506, student discipline, I don't think there were any changes that we made there with the exception of changes from the MSBA, which is where we get these. I'm just looking through our notes here quick. So, I mean, I can open that one up. Do you want to go through all three of them and then open up for discussion, or?
Yeah, I mean, I'm assuming everyone's taken a look at the drafts that were in the agenda.
Yeah. And then Policy 514, bully prohibition policy. I don't believe we made any changes to that one either. And Policy 522, sex non-discrimination policy. And I don't believe we made any changes to that either.
I mean, it's statutory language updates and clarifications is kind of
Correct.
the headline. So So if there are no questions, then we will move forward and vote on those at the next business meeting, or we can discuss them.
I have no comments.
Okay. Our next item on the agenda is public comment, and we do have Melissa to come speak to the board. I've got a, you can come here.
Come over.
Come on over.
Come on up. I want to make sure I hear you well.
I just have to read something really quickly, okay?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so open forum for a board work session will be conducted at the conclusion of the meeting and must be agenda specific. Comments from visitors must be informational in nature and not exceed the five minutes per issue. The board cannot engage in discussion or debate in those 5 minutes, but will take the information and find answers if that is appropriate. As part of the protocol, it is unacceptable for any speaker to slander or engage in character assassination or discuss student or personnel issues, including but not limited to teachers, coaches, bus drivers, principals, board members, and administrators at a public board meeting. As such, speakers will not be allowed to identify district employees either by name or position during the public comment period. Thank you, Melissa. The table is yours.
So tonight, I'm just here, I have 2 sons that go to the high school, and you guys just briefly touched on like the disciplinary and the safety of school. And so my kids approached me, I have 2 boys, they approached me like a couple weeks ago, and they were really concerned about the safety of school and the things that are happening. Between Monday and a Wednesday, there had been approximately 6 fights in the day, in 3 days. And so to them, that's very concerning because they feel like nothing's being done. Like we talk about, I emailed Mr. Berg and he sent me one back, saying we have consequences and we're taking action and all these things. But coming from my kids and their friends, as being there every day, they feel like nothing's being done. And so it's concerning. I mean, a couple of examples I have is my son's girlfriend was over at our house and she was describing, they're walking in the halls and somebody drops a notebook. And their instant thought is to stop and listen. Like, is that a gunshot? I mean, they're scared. And then they go about realizing, oh, somebody dropped a notebook. And they're telling me like, they can't go into certain bathrooms because there's certain things happening, We all know, I mean, as we all grew up, there was always maybe some drugs going on or whatever, and they've said, there's certain bathrooms that either they're handing them out or they're doing them, and I know it's a reality that we all live in, but for them to not even be able to go to a bathroom, and they're looking for the teachers or the principals or whomever, the administration to be, stopping this and being held accountable for things. So the biggest issue is they just feel like, these kids are just doing whatever they want and they're not being held accountable. And, my son's girlfriend was walking down the hall. She's a very sweet girl and she bumped into a gal and, her exact words were, "Watch it, bitch, I'll beat your ass." I mean, these are the things that are happening in the hallways. And so you have these really nice kids, but then you have these other kids that are causing these issues and they feel like nothing's being done. They don't feel like they're being heard. And so it comes into play like, what are you actually doing as far as discipline? You talk about it, but are you actually putting your money where your mouth is? And it's very frustrating as a parent, because it's like my kids go to school to learn, but they can't learn because it's distracting. Or they can't walk down a certain hallway, or they can't go to the lunchroom because there's a group of kids that are constantly there that are causing problems. And it keeps on happening. So it's like you talk about policies, you have the school has policies, but is it, well, we're gonna talk to you and then nothing's gonna be done. And it just keeps happening and happening. So the kids are like waiting for something, as they say, bad to happen before something is done. And, I've talked to a lot of other parents and not even just our district. And a lot of people are like, our other high schools, yeah, there's fights, but not the amount of fights. not the amount of problems that we're having. And so it's frustrating, you know? Like, I send my kids to the school every day in hopes that they're getting a good education, they're being taken care of, they're safe. But then I got my kids coming home saying, we don't feel safe. And when I hear there's, you know, you have one resource officer that's split between 2 middle schools and a high school, and you have over 2,000 kids at a high school, why do we not have more? You know? Why is that not figured into the budget? So I guess it's just concerning, and I guess a thing for me too is, you know, if you really want to know what your students are feeling, maybe take a poll. Do an online poll. You'll get the honest answers. If you walk up to a kid and say, hey, you know, what do you think about our school? You're not going to get an answer. You're going to be like, oh, it's fine. But if you do it anonymously, maybe you'll get your answers, you know? So I just, as a parent, feel like it's a circus, you know? And my kids are there to learn, and when you talk about transitioning from like elementary to middle school, well, then you're also talking about different emotional challenges and all these things, but at the same time, it's like everybody's holding everyone's hand instead of doing something about it. You know, what happened to the day when you got to school, you knew the bell was gonna ring, you needed to be in your classroom, in your seat, shutting up and listening to your teacher? Because my kids tell me, like, my freshman is going to school with his brother, and then he's flexing out of class, and then he's going to my son's junior classroom. So I have, you know, my kid is like wandering the halls, and I just, like, where is the structure? You know, like, kids need the structure, and they need the discipline and the accountability. I just feel like it's not there.
Okay. Thank you.
Is that 5 minutes?
That's your 5 minutes. Yeah, and I didn't mean to.
No, it's okay.
So we appreciate you coming to the board and sharing your concerns with us tonight. Thank
Yeah.
you.
I just wanted to give you an example.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Yep. Thank you. Thanks.
All right, so our next item, we're going to go into closed session per Minnesota statute 13D.03 for labor negotiation strategy. Can I get a motion to close the session?
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Doyle, second by Simmons. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
We're moving into closed session.